Introduce the second speaker of the day, Pradeep Chakravarthy. For this event, Dr. Pradeep Chakravarthy. He is a graduate of London School of Economics and Jawaharlal Nehru University. And just for Madras Day, he decided to get a PhD from Madras University also. So, he is a very popular writer, speaker. As you know, he is an author. He has written several books. He is very involved in telling kids stories and involving, encouraging kids from into history and all that. He has 2 decades. I again, like Mr. Mohan Hariharan, he has a large fan club. I know half of you are Mohan Hariharan's fan club, half of you are Pradeep's fan club, and somewhere there is a lot of overlap between the 2 audiences also. And he is very kindly accepted to give this talk. I think this is supposed to be delivered a couple of years earlier. He couldn't fulfill that commitment then. So again, I don't really need to do much introduction. I won't stand much in the way of introducing him. He is a very popular consultant, very prestigious consultant. Worked for such international firms as McKinsey, etc. Though he is outside in the world, he is known more as a popular writer, especially in the Hindu magazine. And he has written some very famous books, one on Tanjavur. He's written a book on the lesser known temples of the Tirunelveli district called The Road Less Traveled. The recent book is a book for kids about Indian traditions and so on. So for this event, kindly he has agreed to give us a talk on 2 very local temples, Kapalishvara temple and Tirunelveli temples, which have a very hoary history. And as we are all very eager to hear that, without much further ado, invite Pradeep to take the stage.
Thank you, Arkay, sir, for giving me this opportunity. This is probably the longest PPT that I've ever designed. It took 3 years for it to come out. I'm glad it's come out finally today. Can we just switch off the lights? Thank you, Gopu. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's kind of difficult to do a talk on these 2 temples because every time Madras Day comes, everybody suddenly, that whole love and affection for history, heritage and Chennai just suddenly bursts forth from everybody. And for thousands of years, I think we've been doing these 2 temples. So it's a little difficult. Hopefully, there'll be something I'll tell you today which you didn't know. If there isn't, I'm really sorry. But as a backup, my plan for those of you who know all the stuff that I'm going to tell you about, because you would have listened to many Madras Day events in the past, is there are 2 or 3 really good sound clips of Sikil Guracharan, my very dear friend, brother from another mother type, who is singing some of the songs connected to these 2 temples. And you can, even if you've heard whatever I'm going to tell you before, you can always enjoy the fabulous photographs of Ramesh Raja, which I've used extensively in this PPT. So it's a really lovely photograph of the Kapalishvara temple. I thought we should do both of them together, though geographically Kapalishvara temple is closer, because if you look at the great saints, they've always sang of Mylapore and Tirunelveli together. So most of the information that I'm going to give you today are from temple inscriptions that are found in Chennai. Madras Day largely has become something that celebrates colonial Madras. I tend to stick out a bit like a sore thumb to look at what was Madras like before it became Madras. Yeah. So before the deed of Madras was drawn up and Fort St. George was created, all these small places were individual villages. Much like today, there are not many villages in Tamil Nadu, but if you go to a really small village, say about 500 people or 1,000 people maximum, that would have been the size of all these small places. I've tried to do some fancy color coding here. And the reason is that I think it's too blurred for you to read over there. No? Let me read out the list. So the places which have inscriptions are places like Madambakam, Thiruvottiur, Pallavaram, Tirumullai, Mylapore, Kundrattur, Tirunelveli, Koyamede, Mangadu, Saidapet, Padi, Tirunirmalai, Tiruvanmiyur, Santhom, Velacheri, Pural, Puliur, Kundrattur, Trisulam and Punamalli. In these places, they also mention other places which are Ezhumur. Ezhumur is what today? Egmore, very good. Okay, Setripedu, which is Chetpet. Nungambakam, which is Nungambakam today. Veperi. Pudupakam, Vesarpadi, which is Vyasarpadi today. Villipakam, Tampuram, what else have I got? Vallisarpakam, Adambakam, and Pammal. These are the other names that I mentioned. If I had to underline two of these, yeah, that would definitely be Pural and Puliur. Any guesses on where Puliur is? Very good. Okay. Hey, you've been attending a lot of these talks. Okay, so it is in Kodambakam. It's a tiny part of Kodambakam. Pural is very famous for the jail. I don't think anybody else knows anything else about Pural. But these two places were the most important parts of Madras or Chennai as we know it today, because they were like the district headquarters. So today they're like nothing in the map, but at one point in time in the Chola period, about 1,000 years ago, these two places were the most important. So moving from that, let's go on to our first temple for today, Tiruvallikeni. I've chosen to take some of the photos of Tiruvallikeni. I'm sure your grandparents would have also not seen these, because these photographs were taken by a German photographer called Friedrich Feyberg in 1851. These are all hand-colored salt prints, and he was actually a piano teacher who kind of got the whole European bug of coming to India and seeing all the great sights and taking lithographs. And then when these people went back, like Thomas Daniel, when they went back to Europe, they would paint these lithographs, create aquatints, publish them as books, and earn a lot of money. So he took a lot of lithographs of Chennai, Madras, and Calcutta. And these are a kind of photograph where the paper is coated with silver. And we have about 10 or 15 of his photographs. So these are two photographs of the Triplicane temple. I like the second one a lot because you can see the there is covered by a thatch. Yeah, so that was how Tiruvallikeni looked in 1851. The first important contemporary reference in the colonial period we have to the Tiruvallikeni temple is actually in the form of this map. So in Arasanipale, which is not too far off from Chennai, near Kanjipuram, there was a very great poet in about 1590 to 1660 called Venkatacharya or Venkatadri. Some people use these words interchangeably. He authored a very fascinating book, Sanskrit Kavya, called Vishwa Gunardasa Champu. Right? So this is a long name, but a very, very interesting work. Fortunately, some teacher, I think, a Sanskrit teacher of Kendra Vidyalaya, she published a Tamil translation, which is what I've used, freely available online, so must read for us. The Champu is a genre of Sanskrit literature. Generally, it is where two people are flying above and they're looking at things happening below and they're discussing what's happening. Yeah. So it's like, let's say we both shared an Insta reel with each other and we're discussing it, roughly like that. Yeah. So in this case, we have Krishanu and Vishwavasu. Krishanu is the eternal optimist. Yeah. Vishwavasu is the eternal pessimist. So they are flying all the way across India. And maybe your favorite town or village in India may also be covered in this. Go and have a look. Chennai is covered in this, and this is the map. So you get some sense of in the south which are the different places that we're going to. So the pessimist is saying, yeah, gee, this Tiruvallikeni, what a horrible place it is. People are sinning, like there are arrows that are coming out of an archer. And this bank of this temple is where Indra came and he sinned so much that he went and had a bath in the tank, and that's made this tank in a very it's a very dirty water kind of thing. Then then he goes on to say foreigners who come here, they're living here, they have no mercy, they're the wrong kind of people to live in a place like this. The Patnam, which is Georgetown today, or Blacktown, which in those days would have actually been the High Court campus, because that's where the seat of the Indian Blacktown was. It says that place is just too cramped. The Yavanar are people who respect Brahmins like you would respect dust. It's a very bad people. They don't wash their feet when they go into a house. Their wealth, and why does God give wealth to the ungodly, poverty to the well-behaved, power to the perverts, and pity to the wise, and beauty to women without character? And he says all these people are all in Triplicane very, very bad people. Then this is of course Vishwavasu, who's the pessimist. So Krishanu says, no, actually look at it this way. That tank is actually a very holy tank, because Indra, when he came into that tank and he had a bath, all his sins were cleansed. It's a very holy tank. And look at how much of garlands of tulasi there are around the place, how many bushes of tulasi. It's such a sacred place, and there are people there who follow the dharma, which is why it rains in Triplicane. Yeah. Then he goes on. He says, no, that's not true. You know, these people who live in Patnam, the optimist continues, and he says, you know, all these tulasi leaves are there. And also, actually, yeah, I mean, they might not have wash their feet when they come inside the house, but they don't steal the wealth of others. So I think the author didn't know about the drain of wealth theory at that point of time. But he anyway says, this is a Patnam people, they don't steal the wealth of others. They have courts of law, so it's not that there is no dharma. They have their own courts of law, but there is some rule of law over there. And they invent very unusual things. So even Yavanars or foreigners can also be good people. Yeah. So the interesting thing in this conversation is, and in all of them throughout the text, is always the person who gets the last word is the optimist. So I think in a way somehow the author is telling us that, yeah, I mean, it can be a messy place. Even today, Triplicane, Mylapore can be a very messy place. I just went through some of the traffic there, and I heard some of the choicest bad words today, just a couple of hours ago. So things haven't changed much. But I think the point that the author is trying to tell us is, look, I mean, people are going to be good and bad. Let's take the good stuff and move on. So this is one very interesting reference that we have to how the town was at that time. I guess the author focused only on Triplicane. We don't have them going through Mylapore as well. But in the old days, Triplicane and Mylapore were both seen as one town together. So we got a lovely picture in 1851 of how the Black Town looks. So this is what the High Court is today. Moving on, our first stop is going to be the Tiruvillikeni temple. The Sthala talks about a king called Sumati, who wanted to see Krishna as he was during the Mahabharata war, and that is how the Lord manifested himself to King Sumati. Well, it's also the case that most of these Sthala Puranams are actually written in the 17th, 18th centuries to encourage people to come to temples, and sometimes they were danced and performed as well. So who knows, this Sthala Purana might have also been danced at one point of time. In the Sthala Purana, there's a very long, beautiful poem on Kairavani, the temple tank, which you can see over here. And it says, this water is as sacred to us as Vishnu is, and the conch is to Vishnu. I think that might also be a gentle reminder to us, which I think later generations we lost out on, that we have to look after our water tanks well. So fortunately, I think there is some water in the tank now. It's not as bad as the one in Mylapore, but these are, I think, the value of these Sthala Puranas is also that you need to look at lessons that we can learn on environmental consciousness and the importance of the temple and water to the local community. The Moolavar, the composition of the deity and the deities within the temple is quite unique for all Vaishnava temples across Tamil Nadu, probably across India as well. There are actually two temples inside. One is for Venkatakrishna or Parthasarathi. Venkatakrishna means one who's beautiful. There is another temple for Teliyasingar or Narasimha, who was probably the Pallava deity, 8th, 7th century or maybe even earlier. So this is a very unique temple because both these two temples are within the same temple, which means the number of festivals in the temple are a lot more, which is a good thing for a large city like Chennai or Triplicane, because the fundamental purpose for many of these festivals and temples was to generate employment and also to entertain people in those days. Apart from that, there are also shrines for Ranganatha, for Rama, for Varadraja, Varaha, Vedavalita is of course the goddess's name, Andal and the different acharyas as well. The main deity is also of a very unique nature. You see the deity with Balarama, his brother, Satyaki, Pradyumna, Rukmini and Aniruddha. Pradyumna is Krishna's son, Aniruddha is Krishna's grandson, and you see Rukmini as well. This is a very, very unique composition. You don't see this kind of a composition of deities inside. In the north, even before the Common Era, in the 2nd century BC, 1st century BC, in the north, especially in the UP area, there was a great deal of devotion towards the a group of gods called the Panchaviras. Yeah. So it was Krishna, Balarama, Samba, Pradyumna and Aniruddha, Panchaviras with Rukmini. We don't have any of those temples anymore. That whole practice, what they did, all of that is lost. Madam, there's a seat in the front for you. This whole practice is lost. We don't know anything about this today. This is one of the few temples where we can actually see this. So there are some temples maybe in Kanchipuram as well where there is some connection to this kind of an ancient worship pattern. But for all other practical purposes, we've forgotten what they did. It is also possible that this, I don't want to use the word cult because it has negative connotations, but this system of worshipping Krishna and his family, Samba and Sataki were both kinsmen of Krishna, was also probably a way to bring Krishna as a very important god into the new age post the Mahabharata, rather than in the old times when he was just seen as a god of the Yadavas or just of the cowherds. So Yugantar is a wonderful book written by Airavati Karve. She discusses this in great length, and those of you who are interested in these kind of things, you should go and refer to that. But that being said, this is a very, very important deity here, a very unique composition which we don't find generally in India, definitely in Vishnu temples. And like I said, the Narasimha temple was from the Pallava period, also very rare image. Some of the paintings here are from the Tanjo painting collection of Kuldeep Singh, which is now in the Bombay Museum. So that's a really beautiful one. And that one, because he is shown white, is probably Balarama. Because Balarama was in the Sangam period, which is about 100 BCE to 100 CE, was also known as Valion. He was the god of the farmers, and he was generally shown white in color. This white for Krishna came only during the Tanjo painting times of the colonial period. Otherwise, Krishna was really dark, blackish, grayish in color. The Alvars are 12 saints who sang deeply about Vishnu. They date from about the 3rd century CE till about the 12th century CE. The 3 earliest Alvars were Peyalvar, Bodhatharvar and Poigalvar. We don't even know their original names. One of them was actually born in Triplicane. Thirumangi Alvar was the last of the Alvars, the most prolific of them. He has also sung about this place. Peyalvar's devotee or student, Bhakti Sara, later turned on to become Tirumahisi Alvar. He has also sung a verse about this place. So these are the 3 Alvars who have sung about this place. I'm going to give you some information about what they've sung, but I'd love for us to pause for a minute and listen to Sikil Guracharan rendering one of the verses in a bit.
வேதத்தை வேதத்தின் சுவை பயனை வேதத்தை வேதத்தில் சுவை பயனை விழுமிய முனிவரர் விழுங்கும் விழுமிய முனிவரர் விழுங்கும் கோதுயில் இன்கனியை வேதத்தை வேதத்தின் சுவை பயனை நந்தனார் களிற்றை நந்தனார் களிற்றை குவலயத்தோர் தொழுது ஏத்தும் ஆதியை அமுதை என்னை யாழுடையப்பனை இன்கனியை நந்தனார் களிற்றை குவலயத்தோர் தொழுது ஏத்தும் ஆதியை அமுதே என்னை யாழுடையப்பனை ஒப்பவர் இல்லா மாதர்கள் வாழும் மாட மாமயிலை திருவல்லிக்கேணி மாட மாமயிலை திருவல்லிக்கேணி 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 கண்டேனே கண்டேனே திருவல்லிக்கேணி கண்டேனே.
So that was one verse from Tirumangayyavar's set of verses on this temple. All of them he ends by saying, I saw him at Tiruvallikeni Kandene. And in each of these verses, he is also talking about one of the episodes from Krishna's life. And I thought I should play this one because it says, Oppavarilla Madar, which means that Tiruvallikeni has women who are incomparable to anybody else because they were so good. So I thought I should put that in over here. And at one point in time, Tirumangayyavar talks about Tondeman Pallavar Kon. This is probably a reference to Nandivarma Pallava Malla from the 8th century. And it's very likely that this was also the king who had a close connection with him, and there is a connection to this king and the Vaikunthanatha Perumal in Kanchipuram as well. Peyarvar and Tirumazhiyarvar, their references to Tiruvallikeni are also in about one or two pasurams. They talk about the beauty of the town, and more important, how the conches and the pearls are washed onto the seashore, and in the light of the moon they dazzle like lights. And everybody is confused about whether they are in the day or in the night, because the reflected light of the conches and the pearls from the moonlight is dazzling everybody's eyes. So this is what they see today. Unfortunately, I don't know whether there are conches and pearls today, but there are a lot of lights on the Marina Beach. I think that's all we can be content with today. Sorry. The temple inscriptions in Tiruvallikeni are very important, because while Tiruvottiur has the maximum number of inscriptions, the earliest inscription in Chennai is actually from Tiruvallikeni. This is from the time of Pallava king Dantivarma. Maybe Dantivarma Pallava has a connection with the Dandishwara temple in Velicheri as well, we don't know. 808 CE is the date of the inscription. So what had happened in that situation was, at an earlier point of time, before 808, there must have been some drought and pestilence in the town, and the temple committee had sold a lot of the precious metal objects that belonged to the temple. And they had sold it at an interest of 45 kadi nel. So this kadi is a weight of nel. So they had to pay an interest of 45 kadi of nel every month or every year. We're not sure. Must be every year. And therefore the temple was in a really bad shape. And there was one local person called Visayarian, who came forward, and he recovered the temple from the debt. And in deep gratitude, the temple gives him some temple honors. Now we also have a list of what he got recovered. So this must have either been all the things that they had sold, or maybe some of them. So we have a Ira Velakku. So must have been some kind of a lamp in the design of Elam, which is Sri Lanka. Don't know what that was, but there's a lamp over there. Then there is also some Vattil and Uloha Pane. Uloha Pane must be a cast bronze pot, and Vattil are cups that are used in the temple even today. So these are, I mean, not those Vattils, but that word is still in use even today. So this man seems to have got these back to the temple, and a very grateful temple gave him some honors. There's another interesting inscription from the Chola period. In one of the inscriptions in Mylapore, we know that Kulothunga Chola had a palace somewhere over here. And in one of the Chola period inscriptions from the 12th or the 13th centuries, we have a lady, Devadasi, who was a dancer in the Tiruvalikeni temple. She gave a lamp to the temple in Trisulam, which is near the airport. Even today, it's such a long distance away, but imagine in those days, this lady had some connection with that temple. So it's an interesting point of view from the 13th century. There are also some interesting water tax related inscriptions in Tiruvalikeni from the Chola period in terms of how should be taxed, who should be taxed, how much should they be taxed, how much of water should be given to the villages, to the fields close by. So we get some sense of water management also from the Chola period. The temple, and in those days, this temple, the revenue district it came under was Kotur Nadu, Puliyur Kotam. Kotur Nadu would have been like the district headquarters, so all of this place would have been Kotur, and Puliyur Kotam would be the Taluk. So Taluk would be Puliyur, which is in Kodambakam, as we said earlier. Much of the temple as we see it today would have come about between 1542 to 1576, when the temple was substantially altered during the time of the Vijayanagara king Sadashiva. The Ranganatha temple was completely built. The Vedavalli Tayar came in for the first time. She was built. The Tiruvayamuri Mandapam was built, which is right in the front. The Madapalli was completely renovated and built. The Tirumadil, or the surrounding wall, was built at that time. And the Utsav Vigraha of the Tayar, or the goddess, was also consecrated at that time. So it was a very, very big event of 1576. It is very likely that the Sthala Purana would have also been written at this time, because generally when such a major renovation for the temple happened, at the end of it, they'd have a large dance or a drama for everybody to mark that occasion and entertain everybody. Very likely that this Sthala Purana may have been written at that point of time. Then during the reign of another important Vijayanagara king, Venkata II, who ruled from 1586 to 1614, the temples for Bhashikar, or the Ramanuja, was built. Teliyasingar was rebuilt. So there must have been an earlier Pallava temple, because the Pallavas were very, very fond of Narasimha as a deity. That must have been rebuilt at that point of time. And it is very likely that the stone rings on these pillars, which you will see in Kanjipuram as well, must have come during the time of Venkata II. This looks very much his style of work if you look at what he has done in Hampi and in other places in Tamil Nadu as well. So these are a few things that we need to know about the Parthasarathi temple. The temple was very badly affected in the 1672 to 75 siege of when the British fought the French. And there's a very important ruling in 1736, when there was a major dispute in the temple about some merchants in the temple not saying the primary shlokas of whatever they had to recite. So when the Divya Prabandham is recited by people for Vaishnava devotees who know Tamil, the first verse is different. So the one subsect will say one and the other subsect will say another, and it's a huge dispute always. I think this merchant must have been involved in this kind of a dispute. He'd have been not from the Brahmin community, he would have been from the Naidu community, who were very, very fond of this temple, and it's a very important temple for them. So this merchant dispute, it led to either him being arrested or him being fined. Now the others in his community didn't take this lightly, so they all went and stormed Fort St. George. And it became a huge law and order issue. And that was the time when the then Governor General said, the East India Company will not play any role in the religious disputes of the country. They were very clear. They said, we are here to trade. We are not going to be interfering in religious disputes. And this ruling was changed only in 1857 when the British Crown took over the control of India from the East India Company. So this is an interesting inscription, and if we didn't if the British didn't win from the France, then this temple and all of us today would have been speaking in French and not in English. When this temple, when the siege was lifted and the French were defeated, the Pedanaik, or the chief Dubash, or the chief translator for the Indians who were helping the British, he got some special benefits over here in the temple. And this temple was seen, along with the town temple, was seen as one of the officially recognized temples. So that meant that even today, if I'm not mistaken, when the temple procession happens, there's a guy who's wearing the Dawali uniform and who goes with the mace in the front. All of this is from that point of time. But it didn't come cheap. I mean, nothing with the British was free anyway. So the temple had to pay 10 cash every year, which was a lot of money in those days, as rent and as for these privileges to the East India Company. So this is a little bit of information on the temple. There was some information on the festivals. The temple celebrates all the festivals that you'll find in a Vishnu temple, but it'll do it twice, because there's the Telliya Singar or the Narasimha temple, and then there's the Parthasarathi temple as well. Some of these, so there are two Brahmotsams over here. A very south coastal touch is one of the first vahanas that is used is the Punna Mara Vahanam. The Punna is a tree that is local to this region. In the Sangam period itself, Neidal or the seashore areas where the Punna tree is found. So this Punna Maram is an important vahana. The other important vahana that was recently revived is in the month of Vaikasi, when Madurai Muttu Jamedar was some kind of a landed gentry of Madurai, and he started a tradition of having a Kannadi Pallak, which is a palanquin inset with mirrors. The HRC recently worked on reviving that. The other pallaka that's interesting is, I'm not able to play the video today, but you can watch this on YouTube. The other interesting pallaka that this has is the Alum Pallaka, which is a palanquin with 4 bearers. And that whole thing is lifted. So all of this is made out of wood, and the whole thing is lifted by multiple people around. So this is a very, very unique vahana, which is found only in this temple. The Uriyadi for Janmashtami, which is Monday, right? Which is a very, very famous festival over here. Kartike has a Taila Kapu, which is when the oils the deities are bathed by that. Thai Masam, the deity which happens in Jan or Feb, the deity goes all the way to Ekatatangal. So there is an inscription in Saidapet temple, in Karneshwara temple, which says this route is the route that the temple has to go in, and that Ekatatangal, that mandapam over there, actually belongs to the Parthasarathi temple. It's quite an affair in those days it was. Masi is February, March, which is when they have the Davanotsava mandapam, the Davanotsava festival, which is when the Davanam is a very fragrant leaf, and the deity is anointed with a lot of that leaf. That leaf is spread out. It's definitely a very heady scent, a very heady fragrant. So those of you who like fragrances, you should definitely go and have a look at that. So these are some of the festivals in the temple. Thiruvillikeni has a great advantage. It's right in the middle of the city, so it's very easy for people to access it, which means these festivals become very, very popular, and they're very well attended, and you can find a lot of information on them in YouTube. So I'm at about 30 minutes, so it's time to go to our next stop, and the last stop, which is our Mylapore Kapalishvara temple. One more lovely image, photograph that Ramesh Raja was very kind to take. So I got to tell you, this temple that we're seeing here today is only about 300 years old. Nothing from the old temple exists. Nothing. Right? There are some stones here and there. We'll go through where those stones are. The images, everything is new. New meaning 300 years ago. But that should not allow us to discount the importance of this temple, because this is one of the oldest temples in Madras, and it has a very, very hoary tradition, and that's something that we need to know a little bit about. So in a way, the hero for the story today, apart from the god and goddess, of course, is Trinyana Samandar, who's a very, very important saint, probably from the 7th century. Trinyana Samandar was born in Sirgai. This is a lovely Tanjo painting again, which shows the most important scene in his life, when as a child he is fed milk by Parvati herself, and then when his father comes out from having a bath, you can see the father having a bath over there, he comes out and he says, "How is there milk dribbling in your mouth? Who did this?" And he says, "Well, Shiva and Parvati did it," and that's the scene that he saw. and I mean, understandably, the father thinks that the boy is lying. So he says, "Tell me how he looked." And then Triyana Samandar sings Todudiya Seviyone, which is the first verse of the Tevaram. And then at some point in time, he comes down to Mylapore as well, and he sings about Mylapore. Let us listen to the song and then discuss why the song is important, not just for us in Mylapore, but also for social historians.
Tadarit na 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 உறிஞ்சாய வாழ்க்கை உறிஞ்சாய வாழ்க்கை அமனுடைய போர்க்கும் உறிஞ்சாய வாழ்க்கை அமனுடைய போர்க்கும் இருஞ்சாக்கியர்கள் எடுத்துரைப்ப நாட்டில் இருஞ்சாக்கியர்கள் எடுத்துரைப்ப நாட்டில் கருஞ்சோலை சூழ்ந்த கருஞ்சோலை சூழ்ந்த கபாலீச்சரம் அமர்ந்தான் கபாலி 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 கபாலீச்சரம் அமர்ந்தான் பெருஞ்சாந்தி காணாதே கபாலீச்சரம் அமர்ந்தான் பெருஞ்சாந்தி காணாதே போதியோ பூம்பாவாய் கபாலீச்சரம் அமர்ந்தான் பெருஞ்சாந்தி காணாதே போதியோ பூம்பாவாய் போதியோ போதியோ பூம்பாவாய் பூம்பாவாய் பூம்பாவாய்
These verses of Samandar are very, very important. So the structure of the verses is, we're saying this is around 7th century. The structure of the verses is each verse is for 4 lines. First 2 lines he talks about what he sees in Mylapore. The third line is a line where he talks about one festival that happens in the temple. The fourth line he says, why have you gone Pumbavai from not seeing this? So we have to understand the story of Pumbavai, and very helpfully there's a Pumbavai shrine in the temple, and there's a sculpture on the top, a concrete sculpture on the top, which gives us the story. So you can see there's a lady over here and the 2 little bits of broken pot at the bottom. That is really important. So Sivanesan Chetty was a trader who lived in Mylapore, and at some point in time his daughter Pumbavai passes away, and he is absolutely grief-stricken. The parents are grief-stricken, and they cremate her and they save the ashes into an urn. Now at some point in time in 7th century, Samandar comes down, and Sivanesan Chetty and his wife present Samandar with this urn. And they say that, all our lives, her only ambition was to meet you, and this is what has happened. So Samandar, of course, is very, very upset about hearing the story. And he sings a set of 11 verses on the Kapalishvara temple. In each of these verses, he describes the town. We'll just go through what he sees in the town. And then you can, as you go out of this place, you can check whether you can still see these things or not, and then decide whether Samandar's Mylapore is better or our Mylapore is better. He says this place was filled with a lot of punnai trees, and peacocks danced very happily on them. And the streets were filled with women who had large eyes which were lined with coal. They wore many bangles. There were streets which were very prosperous, and many of them had lots of lamps on the road. The waves were creeping on the seashore, and the fishermen who went out, they were so dexterous in piercing them with spears, and they sometimes hunted in the night with the help of lamps to lure the fish to the waters, out of the waters. There were people who would cook or enjoy Neipus pungal, which is really pungal, which is dipped in ghee. There were many, many coconut trees on the coast. Streets were filled with fun and laughter during festival times. There were many peacocks, and there were a lot of people who would sing sweet songs. But there were also dark forests, because in these dark forests were the Jains who spoke such harsh words. Right? That's the word that Samandar uses. Samandar was not a great fan of the Buddhists and the Jains. And then he says there were large forests as well. They were very beautiful forests. And all said and done, if you remember all these verses and you sing these verses, of course you will be close to Shiva's heart. But he also says in the third line, he gives us a list of festivals, and it's amazing that all those festivals continue to happen in the temple. Aipasi, October, November is Thiruvonam is a very important festival. Then in Karthike, November, December, there is a festival over here. Tiruvadirai is the asterism or the star for Shiva, so presumably every month they will celebrate that. Thaipusam happens in Jan or Feb. Masi is the sea festival when the deity goes to the sea. That's in February, March. Panguni Uttram is March and April, which is not just my star birthday, but also an important day for all Shiva and Vishnu temples. That festival is also important over here. Chitrai is the Ashtami, is an important day. There's an Unjal Utsavam over here that happens in April or May. So it's interesting that in some of them he mentions the prasad. We heard about ghee, pungal dripping with ghee, and then there's Ellorai. There are a couple of prasadams that he mentions. It's just amazing that all of these festivals still happen when Samandar sang about them in the 7th century. So at the end of all of these, he says, at least for this festival Pumbavai, will you not rise up? And sure enough, at the end, the pot is shattered, the ashes are disappear, and Pumbavai comes back to life. And Pumbavai, and that's the scene that you see over here. Samandar is still a small child. Yeah, so Pumbavai says, all my life I have wanted to be your companion, so let that wish happen. And Samandar says, no, you can't, because now in a way I've become your father, because I've given birth to you again. And I think Samandar, probably going by the 11th verse of every song of his, I think he said, your heart should be not so much in me, but in service to Shiva. and Samandar goes his way, he goes on to Thiruvotriyur and Thiruvalidayam and all of those places, and we don't hear anything else about Pumbavai. But this is an important verse for us because it shows how important and wealthy the temple would have been even in the 7th century. When Samandar and later on Arunagirinadar from the 15th century also talk about the waves of the ocean kissing the walls of the temple, it's quite clear that they are not talking about the temple that was built here. It was actually where Santom Church is now. So the temple would have been there. It was destroyed by the Portuguese, and this was the new temple that came here about 300 years ago. The 1923 Gazette, the 1923 report of Epigraphic Society of India is a very important and an interesting one. It talks about some scattered inscriptions in Mylapore, which would have definitely come from this temple. One of them, and it says that these were found near the bishop's house in Santom. Now, I had an old grand aunt who said that in the old days when she was growing up in Chennai, in the Santom area, they were near the church or behind the church, there were these large stones and pillars and stuff. So I've not seen them, much before my time. Maybe these were what this 1923 report was talking. And it says there were slender pillars, there was a broken Subramanya image, there were 2 Jain images. There was one of which they believe was a Neminatha, and they would have thought it was him because he was the 22nd Tirthankara. There will be a specific animal which is associated with him, which is why they would have said it would be Neminatha. These, in one of the inscriptions, mentions that the name of the deity at that time was Pumbavai. So it is very likely that this lady who had this young girl who had some connection to Samandar, either was made into the female deity or the goddess, or this deity Pumbavai must have been an important local mother goddess figure. And Shaivism, in wanting to bring this temple into the larger consciousness of Shaivism, they incorporated that Pumbavai into a story connecting it with Samandar. This is also possible because even the word Kapalishvara, Kapalikas were the very heterodox group of Shaivism, which was way outside the Shaiva Siddhanta school. So, and well before Samandar's time and during Samandar's time, and Samandar was fighting about this practice of Shaivism as much as he was fighting about Jainism and Buddhism, which was at that time, worshippers of Shiva were sharply divided between 2 schools. We had the Mantra Marga and the Ati Marga. The Mantra Marga school of worshippers of Shiva said that the way we worship Shiva is through mantra, through rituals, through Vedic rituals, yajnas and so forth. The Ati Marga group said that no, that's not the way we worship Shiva, because Shiva was the first person to break all the rules. I mean, you look at the way he looks, the way he dresses, the way where he lives, he was a man who broke all the rules. So the Ati Marga group said the way to worship Shiva was to do everything that would invite curses and lead to a quick death. And that's what they did. So the Kapala was their begging bowl. This was the head of a person. Some of them would smear themselves with ash from the cremation ground. Many of them lived only there. And sadly, we don't know anything about what they did, because they were very, very harshly chastised by all the commentators who came after that. I think the Kapalikas and the Pashupatas and all of these were small groups of Shaivism. One of them even came from Gujarat. So we've had the the Karonam, many of these temples which are called Karonam, all came from the Gujarat, that area. So these people who worship Shiva in this really unorthodox way, in the way we would look at it, I think it's just important to recognize today how in the 12th century they were perfectly accepted as a part of the community. Unlike today, when we're very rigid about how we should worship people, they were very, very openly, and in fact in the Chola period they were actually patronized by the kings as well. So there is a chance that Samandar, and he does this in many places when he goes to places like Virupuram and on, he tries to bring reduce the power of these kind of very unorthodox ways of worshipping Shaivism to more orthodox, more pure ways of Shaivism, because remember, Samandar's other agenda was also to get back this country into worshipping Shiva or from Jainism and Buddhism. He was really fighting hard against them, which is why in every one of his verses, in the 11th verse, he lashes out against Buddhists and Jains, not just here in Thiruvanmiyur, Thiruvottur, everywhere. So, but this is an important information for us from the 1923 report. Unfortunately, those Jain images are missing. I don't even know where that original inscription is. But it'll be fascinating. I don't know whether we can conclusively prove this either one way or the other, but it'll be fascinating to find out what this Pumbavai story was. Was this a local legend and she became the deity, or was this something that happened during Sambandha's time? It was the other way around. We'll never know, but this is a very interesting story for us to know. Vinita has already done a talk here, so I'm not going to do too much about this. The temple has some fabulous games. Adupaliyatam is here, Panchkon is here. I'm sure she'll give you the better ideas on what they are. Adupaliyatam is a particularly interesting game because it looks at strategy just like chess, but here collaboration is the key. So this was a game that farmers and peasants played, and in their ecosystem, everybody was equally important for the community. Chess was a game that the kings played where you could sacrifice anybody, but you couldn't sacrifice the queen and the king. So these are some of the interesting games, and sadly many of these are slowly going away from our floors. Sadly, like I said, we don't have too many other inscriptions apart from whatever we got in 1923. Paramoy Nanuru is a Buddhist Tamil text. It's got 400 verses, all 4 lines, all very wise sayings. That was also written sometime in Mylapore. And in some of the other fragments of inscriptions, we find that in Mylapore there was a very, very powerful trade guild in the Chola period. So we're talking about 11th, 12th century. This trade guild would have met together, would have decided how much of money we have to, what prices we need to fix for commodities, how much of trade we should do, where we should do the trade. And it's very likely a lot of this trade happened with Southeast Asia. Further north in Chennai is Manali, which was one of the most important salt production centers in Chola period. And further north was Thiruvottur, which was one of the most important ports in the southern part of the coast in those days. So Mylapore traders would have been very wealthy, which is why they would have supported Jainism and Buddhism, because those were the two religions that the traders were very comfortable with, and there would have been a lot of Buddhists and Jains living in Mylapore at that time. Paramoy Nanuru is obviously written by a scholar who was a Buddhist who also lived in Mylapore. A little later, in the 15th century, Arunagirinathar, who is a very great Muruga devotee, also comes to Mylapore. He also sings about the Murugan temple here. Again, it's not the Murugan in the shrine today. It should have been in the Santhom area. Arunagirinathar, unfortunately, is not that valuable for social historians like myself, because he focuses more on the music and the tala, and of course, is very, very deep devotion to Muruga. But I thought, in the scheme of things of us doing songs connected to the temples, and we should play a short clip from the Tirupugar, which is on Mylapore.
வருமையிலொத்தவரிவார் மாமுக மதியன வைத்தவர் தாவா காமிகள் வரிசையின் முற்றிய வாகாராமியல் மடமாத மயிலினிலுற்றவர் மோகவாரிதியதனிடை பூக்கவராளாய் நீநிதி தருவியலுத்தர்கள் மாடா மாமதி மிக மூழ்கி தருப்பர உத்தம வேளே சீருரை அருமுகனற்ற பலீல கூருடை அயிலுரை கைத்தல சீல பூரண பரயோக சரவண வெற்றி வினோத மாமணி தருமரவை கடினீதாவாமணி மயிலுரை வேத்தபுனாதாரமணி பெருவேனோ திரிரிரி தித்தி திதி தொகு 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 தோ திகு திமி 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 ஜே ஜே தி திமி தோ தி தி do ಜನವರಿ ಮತ್ತಳ ಮೀದಾರ್ದೆ ಮುഴತಿಡುವೆನ ಮಿಕ್ಕಿಯಲ್ வேதாவேதொழு திருநடமிட்டவர் காதே மூடிய குருபோதம் உரை செய்யும் உத்தம வீரநாரணி உமையவளுத்தர பூர்வகாரணி உரு ஜகரக்ஷணி நீராவாரணி தருசே உயர்வர முற்றிய கோவேயாரண மறைமுடி வித்தக தேவே காரண ஒருமையிலை பதிவாழ்வே தேவர்கள் பெருமாளே ஒருமையிலை பதிவாழ்வே தேவர்கள் பெருமாளே ஒருமையிலை பதிவாழ்வே ஒருமையிலை பதிவாழ்வே ஒருமையிலை பதிவாழ்வே தேவர்கள் பெருமாளே பெருமாளே பெருமாளே.
So the Tirupukar songs, I think we have about 1,334 of them. They were almost forgotten, and in the 1870s they were revived and collated by A.S. Raghavan. Usually in concerts, Tirupukar is a great way to end the concert, and I think this is a nice way to end the talk as well. I hope you learned something new about these two temples. It's very tall order speaking about these two temples, especially on Madras Day when so many people have done this before. If there is something that you have learnt new, I'm very happy that I've in some small way contributed to your knowledge. If there isn't, I'm sure you'd have enjoyed the images and the audio clips at least. Want to thank everybody for doing this, and thank you especially for Mr. Arkay for giving me this opportunity, and for Gopu for the introduction. I think we can take a few questions. I've done well on time, so if I know the answers, I'll be happy to share whatever little I know. Thank you. Thank you. Does it? Okay. Does it? Okay. Good. Glad to know. I should go there. Yeah, I agree. I've been to the church, never been to the museum underneath. Well done. Thank you. Then in the Santom, the little Mount Church, if you climb up, there'll be some slabs with inscriptions. So this report mentions that also. Yeah. It is what it is. Same Pumbava. Not sure. I think Angam is probably a term to denote a woman of a particular age, or its Angam could also be in a body. You have to read the whole sentence and then it'll make sense. Shaivam.org has now done a very good translation of almost all the Tevarams. So for those of you who don't have the space to buy the entire 12 volumes, like I've done, it takes about like half a cupboard. Shaivam.org will be able to give you more information on that. No, we don't have that. But what we do have is a very rare text of about 73 palm leaves called the Baya Kakada, which Boyo Chakoda. Sorry, that's the way the Oriyas pronounce it. This is from Orissa, and it's the accounts maintained for the Sun Temple in Konarak. It's only in India with so many temples, such a rare book nobody will hear about. Alice Boner has done a fantastic translation. So you might want to go and have a look at it, because it tells us what was the price paid for logs of beams of wood which were used for scaffolding. Right? So then you can calculate how tall the scaffolding was. Then it talks about the prices paid for repair of chisels. And there were some different kinds of chisels. So you'll know it wasn't just one kind of chisel and hammer that was used. There must have been different ones. And all these temples, there's one where the costs of a puja done for 2 or 3 people who died because the scaffolding collapsed. So all these temples we look at today, they would have so many people would have died constructing them. So we have some really rare information like this from Boyo Chakoda. Should be. No, scaffolding they would have used wood, bamboo, something like that. Should have used bamboo, I guess. But check that book out. That'll be an interesting read for you.
Okay. Yeah. Stay here, please. Sure. Yeah. Thank you for turning out in big numbers. Today we had much better crowd than the previous 4 talks. Madhuradhwani generally organized about 6 talks during this Madras Day. Yesterday denotes that we have crossed 385 days of formation of the new Madras. But as Pradeep said, this place is more than 1,500 years old. He has given some examples. I remember there was a talk here by Dr. Nagasamy some 7-8 years back, where he was referring a particular inscription that one of the Pallava kings used Chennai, Patnam as the capital, and they talked about further. I think Gopu was also present. Oh, Mailakon. So this place is that very old. That way, I'm very happy that we are not only restricting to 380, these 400 years, but to go back into all those things. Any information that is new, Hariharan gave an outstanding talk, what happened in the last 70 years in the film theatres. Today we go back and to see. Hope to see you more in the future. Request my friend Harihar Subramaniam to come and present a small memento.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.